Thank you, Karen, for that Bible reading. And as I said, it really helped to have Luke chapter 2 open with you. We're going to look at it two parts in this service together. And from this Bible reading, I presume that's where we get the tradition in our church of baby dedications. So in fact, probably even some of you watching this morning, maybe some at church as well, you were brought as a little baby up to the platform here at this church, and one of the ministers prayed for you when you were a little baby. It could be myself or Eddie Larkman or Mr. Jarvis who prayed over you. Possibly even Mr. Glover, Harvey or Connell, or even Reverend Hoare when the church was first started in the 1930s. But one thing's for certain though, isn't it? Nobody, even at your baby dedication, prayed a prophecy over you like the one here in Luke chapter 2. In all the excitement that God had fulfilled his promises in this little baby, Simeon makes this dramatic prophecy about Jesus, particularly in verses 34 and 35, and we're going to look especially at those today. Two simple things about Christmas that both begin with the letter R. First of all, that Jesus is able to read our minds. And secondly, that Jesus means rejection. So two things. First of all, that Jesus is able to read our minds. And then secondly, that Jesus means rejection. So first of all, Jesus, the thought reader. You saw that in verse 34 especially. The thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. Because Simeon told Mary and Joseph that Jesus is destined to reveal the thoughts of many hearts. Must have been a very strange thing if you think about it. Mary and Joseph hearing this strange man come up to them, telling them something about their baby son. Revealing the thoughts of many hearts. Verse 35. What could that possibly mean? Today, if you're anything like me, you probably immediately think about that in terms of science fiction. Or, already I'm imagining Professor Xavier from the X-Men sort of going like this or something. But that's not what Simeon thought when he looked down at baby Jesus. Rather, the way in which Jesus reads our minds is very different. Instead, Jesus acts as a sort of a test. It's the way we react to him that reveals the true state of our hearts and our minds. Simeon didn't work this out by using a crystal ball. He understood it by reading his Bible. He was inspired by the Holy Spirit to understand what God had already said to his people. He knew that God always worked in this pattern in dealing with his world. And so why would it be any different when the Messiah came? Up until now, the biggest thing that the Israelites looked back to was the time that God had saved his people from Egypt into the promised land. But they didn't just disappear from Egypt and magically reappear in the promised land. Instead, they had to pass their way through the wilderness in the way. And you may wonder, well, why did God make it so hard for them? Well, Moses explains, he gives us this reason in the Old Testament. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. Remember how the Lord our God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. See, that is the way God deals with his people, with this world. He acts towards us in such a way that reveals the true state of our hearts. It shows what we're really thinking. And so as Simeon looks at Jesus, he says Jesus is the acid test of the world. How we respond to the baby Jesus reveals what our hearts are really like. And therefore, as I'm sure many of you know, the birth of Jesus is the defining moment of history. It's the point. It separates between BC, before Christ, and AD in the year of our Lord, after Jesus. All of European history acknowledges that Jesus and his birth is the defining moment of human history, dividing the world into two groups. those who accept him as our salvation, as our revelation of what God is like, and those who reject him. So on Boxing Day, a good question to think through, if this is all true, is what did you really want for Christmas this year? What do you want? What do you really, really want? Now, whatever it is, shows what you consider to be important in life. See, this is a story that I've read about in 1948. I've done a lot of research and I haven't been able to find out whether it's definitely true or not. So you can do some research. Tell me if you find it out. But so I read, the story's told about a radio station in Washington, D.C. in 1948. And in the build-up to Christmas, they wanted to do a piece, a classic sort of happy news story of all the ambassadors in Washington from other countries in the lead up to Christmas. And in the build-up to make this program, they phoned up lots of ambassadors, they interviewed them, and then they put it together for a short piece, news. I think it was just before Christmas. Now, allegedly, they rang and they spoke to the British ambassador, Sir Oliver Franks, a representative of Her Majesty's government, asked him a few questions. They hadn't really explained carefully what it was all about, so he didn't think anything of it. And in fact, he completely forgot all about it until, let's say, it was Christmas Eve when the radio program actually came out, and he told his family excitedly, let's sit down, listen to the radio, because, Daddy's on the news today. And the story came out. They said how that they had asked round all the leaders and the world ambassadors what they really wanted for Christmas this year. And sure enough, the Russian ambassador had said he wanted world peace. And I think it was the Spanish ambassador wanted like a cure for cancer. And another ambassador wanted the end of poverty, and all these things were coming up. And then finally they said, and we spoke to the British ambassador, who said he'd quite like a box of crystallized fruit. What did you want for Christmas? Really? When you say it to yourself, it may sound okay, but would you be happy for what you really wanted for Christmas to be broadcast on live radio to the world? No present in this life can last forever, except the gift of salvation that we have contained in Jesus Christ when we accept him as our Saviour. And how we respond to Jesus this Christmas, it reveals what's really on our mind. How do you respond to Jesus? And I want to put a challenge out to you, particularly those who've maybe grown up in the church. Maybe you went to Sunday school years ago or recently, and you're now thinking, well, I've got lots of questions about it. I want to encourage you in the new year on Sunday evenings at 5:30, not every week, but throughout the term, we're going to start a new series called Reconsider. The first one's going to be on January the 16th. Reconsider. Maybe you're someone who wants to think about this more. You've got questions like, well, is Christianity intellectually credible? You came to Sunday school, you were told these stories years ago, but you're now thinking, well, is it really credible to believe this? Or maybe you're thinking, what about all the hypocrisy in the church? You've got questions like that. If you're someone like that, is it time now to reconsider? Because as we've seen, how we respond to Jesus reveals what's really going on in our minds. So that's the first thing we see this morning. Jesus is a mind reader. As you think about that a bit more, we're now going to sing another great carol. Thanks again to Michael Dusek. He looks a year younger in this video. Let's sing together, While Shepherds Watched. Thanks, Karen. Yes, that's right. We're back in Luke chapter 2. And remember, we're looking especially at verses 34 and 35 and the prophecy that Simeon makes over the baby Jesus. But secondly, we see that Christmas means rejection. And that's why I'm now wearing my Bar Humbug hat. You might be thinking it's a bit weird, and it's Boxing Day, Christmas time in general. And why is John wearing this hat? Seems an appropriate time to be happy, doesn't it? Simeon was all excited. Mary and Joseph were all excited because they'd had a baby son. Isn't this a time to be happy? Well, it's at that time that Simeon, as well as giving some good news, he gave some sad news to Mary too. Remember, the way Luke records it in his gospel sounds quite strange. Luke says, "Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, 'This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too.'" Now, I don't know about you, but I find that quite an odd way to bless someone. But that's what he said. To tell someone that their baby, as they look at them and think, what school, what university he's going to go to, what football teams he's going to play for, instead to be told, he is going to be a sign that is spoken against, and a sword will pierce your own soul. Yet Luke wants us to understand that the happy, joyful news of Christmas is meaningless without the sad news too. Whenever God acts in human history, human beings like you and me have a tendency to reject him, to turn our backs on him. And once more, Simeon knew that because he knew the history of Israel. In the Greek version of the Old Testament that they would have been familiar with at that time, in Numbers chapter 20, verse 13, again it says, while they were in the wilderness, that the Israelites spoke against the Lord. And so when God sent his own son as a sign to the world, Simeon knew that this always happens when God acts. This sign would be spoken against by many. And of course, Simeon was right. He couldn't possibly have known all the details, but sure enough, as Jesus grew up to be a man, he was followed by many, yes, but ultimately he was rejected. He grew up to be rejected by his own people and executed on a cross, even though he was completely blameless and had done nothing wrong. Now, you might be at this point thinking, hold on, John, isn't that Easter? We're in Christmas. How can you've jumped ahead? But Christmas is all about the gift of Jesus to the world. The important thing about any gift, as Karen has explained, is whether that gift is received or not. Easter shows us what we, the world, did when we got that present of Christmas. We didn't want it. We rejected it. We rejected him. Yet the amazing thing we see here in Luke 2 is that was all part of God's plan. Isn't that wonderful? That's why Simeon had to gently warn Mary. She couldn't possibly have grasped everything that it meant. And yet surely those words would have given her just a small bit of comfort, as roughly 30 years later, she would have to watch her own son die. Heartbreaking for any parent to have to watch their own children die. No, as she would wrestle in the future with her own grief, she would know and cling on to the fact that God's plan was not spinning out of control. The opposite. That Jesus dying on the cross was all part of God's plan to save the world. And it had been predicted even at his birth by Simeon in the temple. That amazing truth that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, anyone who believes in him can have a personal relationship with God. That you can right now if you want to do that. Isn't that great? That is what Christmas is all about. Christmas is real. Christmas is about the divine being, God himself, who made the world, stepping into real life, taking on pain and suffering, as well as joy and gladness that comes with life. A real baby who no doubt needed his nappy changing, who grew up to be a real man who experienced both the joys but also the pain and suffering of life. This is reality. And this is what we need, therefore, a God who doesn't ignore that reality, but a God who does something about all of it. When Jesus was born, the Middle East politically was a tinderbox, just like today. And therefore we miss the whole point of Christmas when we wrap the birth of Jesus in the swaddling clothes of sentimentality. We stick our heads in the soil of the Christmas tree and sing, "All glory be to God on high, and to the earth be peace," if we still hear the echoes of the bombs exploding in Syria. No, the sword that Mary would feel piercing her own soul was God's way of dealing with the real problems in the world. And by believing in Jesus, we can know peace. And he is the only hope for real and lasting peace in the Middle East, here in London, in your life too. We can know peace and we can pass it on to Jesus, pass it on to others too, because of Jesus. So all of that means that trusting in Jesus means rejection. Jesus was rejected, and all those who trust in him will expect rejection too. Not because Jesus rejects people, not in the sense that he wants to, the other way around. Because people keep rejecting him. Luke is telling us at the start of his gospel the way Jesus' life is going to go on. That Jesus would grow up to be a divisive person. And he is the same today. He has to be. Not because he goes looking for conflict, but because conflict keeps finding him. Because of who he is. He is a light for the nation, Simon says. A glory of Israel. Put it like this, as a science teacher, I would say, Jesus is a bit like an indicator solution. When I was a chemistry teacher, that was one of the few lessons that everybody seemed to get. You add a universal indicator to a colourless solution, and if the solution is acidic, it turns red. That's right. And if it's alkali, it turns, what is it? Yeah, blue or purple. Now, notice that all the indicator does is reveal what's already there. Nobody blames the indicator. Nobody says, "Oh, you nasty, divisive indicator. I was there getting on with everyone fine, and then you went and turned me red and made me all acidic." No, you were acidic beforehand. All the indicator did was reveal what you already are. And so it is with Jesus. He is a pH indicator in that he reveals the preferences of our heart, whether you really reject him or not. And if that is true, if Jesus really is that pH indicator, it also means that his followers should experience something of that too. Followers of Jesus should expect rejection. If the baby Jesus is a sign that will be spoken about against by many, then followers of Jesus should expect to be spoken against by many too. And we need to hear that as we're about to start another year, 2022. We live in a society that is increasingly turning against Jesus. So as followers, if today you would call yourself a follower of Jesus, we need to grow a backbone if we're going to stand up for Christ in a world that rejects him. You see, as Mary and Joseph looked around first century Palestine, they, like us, could look around and say, look what the world has come to. But that is why Jesus was born as a baby. The best Christmas present the world has ever known. Because instead, Simeon looked at this baby and said, "Look at what has come to the world." This is the best Christmas present you can ever have. And again, I want to challenge you. Jesus isn't just not a mind reader, he's also means rejection too. What have you done this year with the gift of Jesus? Have you received him or rejected him? Because either way, you cannot ignore him. Just as like I finished the last part of the talk with a challenge, I'm going to finish with another one. Here's a little invite to a course we're running in the new year called Hope Explored. Maybe you've been listening and you're not yet a Christian, or you've got lots of questions about Christianity. Hope Explored is going to be a course. It's going to run on Zoom, so you need to be on the internet to do it. It's just 3 weeks. This is a shorter course we've done beforehand. It's just 3 weeks, starting on Wednesday, the 12th of January in the evening. If you'd like to come along, you can either go to our website, that's www.rlbc.org.uk. You can sign up to the course on that. Or you could call the church office. The church office isn't open at the moment, but in the new year when it reopens, the phone number is 0208 868 6772. Anybody's welcome. As I say, it starts on January the 12th. All we'd ask is that you book up by January the 7th, because there's things like booklets we need to send out in advance. But anyway, Hope Explored. If you've got all sorts of questions, I'd really encourage you to come along. Mary is told that a sword will pierce her own soul. And as Simeon points Mary towards the cross, so this passage points us towards the cross. And we're going to respond to what Jesus has done for us by dying on the cross for us. We're going to respond by sharing communion. First of all, we're going to sing a song, Behold the Lamb, which is all about communion. It's all about the Lord's Supper. And then after we've sung that song, then Alan will lead us in communion. So let's sing together now.